Hello, everyone. Hope that you're having a great AIMExpo. Like Lee just said, my name's Lorette Nickel, and I'm so honored to be your moderator here. We have a lot of really important panels and panelists that will be talking about the future of our sport and how we continue to grow and evolve. And this next one is navigating the new political landscape and outdoor recreational growth. And this is Scott Schloegel, who leads the MIC's government relations team. He's going to walk us through what's on the horizon as the U.S. ushers in a new administration and how some certain policies and proposals can impact your business. He's going to cover the MIC's latest actions to protect the $48 billion powersports industry from unfair legislation and how the MIC has led efforts to keep public lands open to OHV enthusiasts. Joining Schloegel will be Ambreen Tariq, Senior Program Director at the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, who will discuss the economic impact of the growing outdoor recreation industry, the impact of the new Explore Act law, and how it affects the power sports industry. But first, please welcome the Senior Vice President of MIC Government Relations, Scott Schloegel. Thank you, Scott.
Well, thank you, Lorette, and welcome to everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys here today. And I'm going to run through a lot of this information very quickly because I've got about 15 minutes to give a presentation, but we'll have time later for Q&A, so I would welcome any questions that you guys have following the presentation. So as Lorette touched on, we're a $48 billion a year industry, the power sports industry, employing more than 118,000 people here in the United States, with about 1.3 million vehicles that were sold in 2023. So really a significant impact nationally, but then when you get down on the state level too, we have significant impact in various states, and that allows us to have some influence with legislation that's going on throughout the year. So why should you as a dealer, a manufacturer, an aftermarket company care about government relations, and why should that be important to you? Well, when you take a look at it, there's a little over 9,100 bills that were introduced at the federal level last year, another 102,000 plus bills that were introduced in the states, and so together that's about it's more than 111,000 bills that were introduced throughout the year. And when you go into most dealerships, you know, this might be what a desk looks like in the manager's office, right? In dealerships, you got a lot of other stuff to worry about that you're working on, and you don't have time to be worrying about all the other host of issues that we're covering, like EPA, CARB, electric vehicles, tariffs, tax rates, public lands, noise levels, lane splitting, emissions regulations. And so that's what we do on your behalf, and we sift through all of that legislation to let you know what's important and what's coming up that may be impacting your business. So when you look at the elections this past year in the states, there were a number of governor elections that went on, but none of them switched parties. They were all pretty much, if the Democrat controlled the state before, they control it now. If a Republican controlled the governorship before, they control it now. So not a lot of impact at the governor's levels, but at the state legislature level, there was some change that went on. You can see in purple there the states where there was a change in power of some sort or another, those being Alaska, Minnesota, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, where there were some changes in the legislatures. When you look at the states as a whole, there are states where there's a trifecta, we call it, where the governor, the state house, and the state senate are all controlled by that same party, and then there are split states that are out there. And so this year around, this slide that you see here shows the states where there are trifectas. So the blue states are controlled completely by the Democrats, the red states are controlled completely by the Republicans, and the purple states are ones that are controlled and have split power that they're doing. So this past year in Michigan and Minnesota, they had broken up the trifecta there, where Democrats were in charge of all branches of the government, and Republicans either took control of one of those chambers, or they have a tie in the case of Minnesota, where there was a tie amongst the Republicans and Democrats in the House. Presidential election, you all know by now that Donald Trump was elected president. He did so by flipping a number of states that he had lost this last time around. So you saw in Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, those were very close seats last time the Democrats won it. This time Trump flipped those states, and then he also won what they call the blue wall states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So with that, that gave him a significant electoral college win, right, of 312 electoral college to 226 for Harris. However, when you take a look at the popular vote, he didn't quite break the 50% mark in the popular vote, and won by about 1.5% over Kamala Harris. So not a significant, huge win when you look at the popular vote, but more significant when you look at it from the electoral college vote. And this one just kind of shows you some of those really close races, right? In Michigan, he got less than 50% of the vote, but still won. Wisconsin, same thing. And then you get into Georgia and Pennsylvania, where he had a little bit larger margin, where he broke the 50% margin, but still very close. The U.S. Senate elections were kind of expected this time around. The Democrats were they were playing defense right from the get-go. They had a bunch of seats that were very marginal, and most of us assumed that the Democrats would lose control of the Senate, which is what happened. The Republicans flipped Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And then the Democrats held on in Arizona, which was really close last time around, and they held on in Wisconsin and Michigan by super narrow margins, very close races that happened there. So the result is that the Republicans control the Senate with 53 votes. The Democrats have essentially 47 votes. There are two independents, but they caucus with the Democrats, and so it's a 53-47 split in the Senate for this year. The Senate Motorcycle Caucus is going to stay the same. Senator Joni Ernst, who you see there on the left, a Republican from Iowa, and then Gary Peters, a Democrat from Michigan, on the right. They are co-chairs of the Senate Motorcycle Caucus. Senator Peters has announced that he's not going to run next time around, so in 2026 we'll have some change in the Senate Motorcycle Caucus. There's one or two members who have moved from the House over to the Senate, who we know we're going to pick up as additional members of that Senate Motorcycle Caucus as well. When you take a look at the House elections, again, were very close. A lot of folks thought that the Democrats might flip the House. The Republicans were able to hold on. They have a GOP majority there of 220 to 215. That majority, though, is getting slimmer and slimmer, because you have three Republicans who are going to join the Trump administration, one being Matt Gaetz, who was going to be the Attorney General nominee, or was the Attorney General nominee, but then had to resign and pull his name out of contention there following the ethics report that came out on him. And then you have Elise Stefanik, who's going to be heading over to the UN as the ambassador of the United Nations, and Michael Waltz, from Florida, who is the new NSA director. So you're effectively down for about the next 100 days to a majority of 217 to 215, which means that the Republicans can only lose one or two votes on any particular bill that's coming through. So it's going to be extremely close in the House, and very difficult for them to get anything done that doesn't involve bipartisan legislation. And certainly there's not a lot of bipartisanship that's going on right now, with the exception of outdoor recreation in Congress, so it'll be very interesting to watch. The House Motorcycle Caucus will be largely the same. Dr. Burgess, who is a congressman from Texas and was the co-founder of the House Motorcycle Caucus, he retired, but we still have Tim Walz, a Republican from Michigan, Don Norcross, a Democrat from New Jersey, and Troy Balderson, who's a Republican from Ohio, who are the co-chairs over on the House side. We did see some loss in our House Motorcycle Caucus membership, so to the extent that you all know anybody who's in Congress from your local area, and you can work with us to help grow that caucus, we're going to work very hard to kind of build our numbers back up this time around. Going to the president's nominees for various departments, Sean Duffy, you've probably all seen recently with the airplane tragedy that we had in the DC area a week or so ago. But he originally was on The Real World on MTV. That's kind of where he first became famous. Then he ran for Congress, won, was in Congress for a couple of terms, left there, went to Fox News as a commentator, and then Trump tapped him for the transportation secretary. So we'll be working closely with him on a number of issues. Lee Zeldin is a former congressman from New York who is the new head of the EPA. During the last month or two of the Biden administration, there was a barrage of environmental regulations that came out of the EPA. I expect that Zeldin will probably work to reverse a lot of those regulations in the early part of this term for President Trump. Moving to the Secretary of Interior, Doug Burgum is a great guy who was appointed by Trump. He's the former governor of North Dakota. While he was governor of North Dakota, he started up an Office of Outdoor Recreation. You'll hear a little bit more about that from Ambreen, but really important for us on the public lands access stuff, and he's going to be somebody, he's got an ATV, he's got a side-by-side, he's got a snowmobile, he really understands our industry, and that's going to be great. Chris Wright was just approved this week as the Energy Secretary. Of course, that's a lot of the EV stuff that's going on with electric vehicles, electric charging infrastructure, and I think you're going to see this administration try to undo a lot of what was done by the Biden administration, and he'll have a hand in that stuff, so we'll watch him closely. For those of you that might be dealers that have SBA loans or grants, Kelly Loeffler is the nominee to be the new head of the SBA, the Small Business Administration. She is a co-owner of the WNBA team in Atlanta. She was appointed as a senator for a short period of time, ran for a full term there, and ended up losing, but she'll be likely to be the new SBA head. Getting to the regulatory side of things, the Federal Trade Commission is one that deals a lot with particularly with dealerships and dealership issues. You may recall 2 years ago there was a proposal to impose a whole bunch of regulations on dealers on what they were going to have to do in terms of compliance on a whole host of issues when selling vehicles. We, your government relations team, had made the argument that that should not be the case and that powersports should be exempt from that. Don't taint us with the sins of the auto industry. And he agreed with that, and he has been a commissioner for some time, is now being elevated up as the new chairman, so we expect that that will be a good relationship there. Jamison Greer is the nominee as the new ambassador, the head of the U.S. Trade Representative. He is not going to be friendly to us. He was the chief of staff for Bob Lighthizer in Trump's very first term, and is somebody who is very supportive of tariffs and tariffs on any number of countries, which I'll get to in just a little bit. And then the Consumer Product Safety Commission, which governs the safety-related issues for all of our four-wheel stuff, for off-road vehicles, off-road motorcycles as well. Peter Feldman was appointed by President Trump in his first term to the commission and was elevated recently to the acting chair of the CPSC. We have a lot going on there with rulemaking on debris penetration and some other things that are extremely important to us. We're hopeful that he will end up being Trump's nominee, but he hasn't announced yet who he wants for the permanent chair of CPSC. Getting into some of the issues that are a priority for us, I mentioned public lands, right? All of the vehicles that we are selling and that you and I ride every day, we want to be able to use those on public lands. That means that we need to be working with the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, the Park Service, the state lands, state legislatures and governors on state lands issues. Again, something that Ambreen will touch a little bit more on, but we work very closely on those public lands issues. The Recreational Trails Program is a fantastic program that funds trails across the country in all 50 states, and that is funded with the gas tax dollars that we pay every time we gas up our off-road vehicles. And so There's a fund that all goes into. Right now it's funded at about $85 million a year, but it's estimated that we pay in roughly $281 million into that fund each year. So we're going to try to get back more of those funds that we're already paying in every time we power up our off-road vehicles. And then 30% of that funding goes for motorized trails, 30% for non-motorized trails, and then the remaining 40% goes for mixed-use trails, and it can cover everything from educational stuff to trail grooming, trail maintenance, trail construction, trail heads, parking lots, bathrooms, that kind of stuff. So a super important program that expires next year that we're working on. PFAS is one of the biggest issues confronting our industry right now, perfluoral and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These PFAS are in everything from dental floss to medications to gaskets, hoses, wire harnesses, wire coatings, jackets, gloves, boots, microchips. And the big issue that we're seeing is that across a number of states, they're looking to ban PFAS. And as they're looking to ban PFAS, they'll come up with an arbitrary date and just say, as of this date, you can no longer sell anything in this state with PFAS in it. When they're doing that, you likely have a stock room that's filled with parts, right? Replacement parts that you need to be able to sell. And so we're working to try to ensure that anytime they're putting in one of those bans, that we also have the ability to have a safe harbor provision so that you don't have to just get rid of all of that stuff and then you can still sell it for some period of time. What we see in the legislation that's out there is we see legislation that is addressing juvenile products, textiles, packaging, comprehensive bans on PFAS, reporting requirements, you name it, there's a whole bunch of them. Every week we send out an email update to those folks that are members of MIC who are part of our PFAS working group, so you can see all the legislation that's pending out there and any changes that have gone on throughout the week. And that's a really important and valuable report for our members. The other thing we have is a second report, which is on all of the laws and regulations that have gone into effect. So you've got legislation where they're proposing changes, then you've got the laws and regulation where they're in effect. That can be found on our website. And the reason that that's important is you take a look just at 2025 here. You've got California, Colorado, Minnesota, and New York all had new provisions that went into effect on January 1st that you're going to have to comply with. And then there's a key date that's coming up in July for the reporting to EPA. Another issue that's really important this year is the tax cuts that were done back in 2017. They expire this year. If they don't get renewed, that means manufacturers are going to face higher taxes on their manufacturing processes. Businesses are going to face higher taxes, and individuals are going to face higher taxes. And the National Association of Manufacturers gave me this slide where they estimated to be about 6 million jobs that would be lost if those tax credits aren't extended, with $540 billion in lost wages. So really important for us to try and get that done. That's going to be super hard this year. I don't think that it's going to be an easy task at all. There's a lot of Republicans actually who never voted on these tax cuts the first time when in the first Trump administration, who are saying, you know, we don't need it. Let's just keep cutting and cutting and cutting, and so it'll be very difficult to get those through. The other big issue of the day, or of the week actually for this week, is the Trump tariffs. Trump had said that he was going to impose 25% tariffs on everything coming in from Mexico and everything coming in from Canada, with the exception of energy, which was going to be at 10%. And then he's throwing in another 10% tariffs on everything coming in from China. So anything that you're importing from China is going to be 10% more expensive. Thankfully, on Monday morning, or Monday afternoon and Monday evening, Trump reached agreements with Mexico and Canada to pause those tariffs that were supposed to go into effect on Tuesday. So there's another 30 days before those may go into effect. Make no mistake about it, if those go into effect, it's going to hurt our industry terribly. It is going to be very painful for us. It's going to raise inflation. Prices are going to go up. It's not going to be a good thing. And what you saw was you saw Canada immediately come out and say, okay, if you're going to slap 25% on us, we're going to slap 25% on you. So they had done proposed tariffs as well that were retaliatory tariffs. on motorcycles, motorcycle tires, clothing, safety gear, shoes and footwear, and a whole host of other things, but these are the ones that were relevant to our industry. Again, thankfully, that's been put on pause for a month, but could very well come back again in the first part of March. Last issue I just want to touch on real quickly is our MIC fly-in that we do every year. This is an opportunity for you to come to Washington, D.C., all of our members to come to Washington, D.C., meet with your elected officials, their staff, talk about the issues that are priorities for us within the industry. So maybe you're here in Nevada where BLM lands are really important for us to be able to go out and ride side-by-sides as we did yesterday out at the Polaris Adventures nearby here. That was just fantastic. Or maybe tariffs and taxes are the most important thing to you. Maybe some of the other issues that I've touched on. These are the folks who were in last year. This is a view behind us is the Potomac River with a couple of military helicopters that were flying by at the time. But a great opportunity both to meet with elected officials and educate them about what's facing our industry, and secondly, to network with very senior level executives. A lot of our board members come in for it, and senior level folks from many different companies. So hopefully each and every one of you who are MIC members come to that. I do have some flyers here about it as well. And then lastly, this is almost all of your government relations team. There's a couple of them missing that are not out in the DC area, but they're the ones who get through those 111,000 bills out there each year, write letters, do advocacy efforts, spend late nights working on any host of issues for you. So a thank you to the rest of the government relations team. Most people see me on Ride Report and other things like that, but these guys are the ones who are doing so much of the work. So I appreciate the work they're doing and would welcome any questions after Ambreen's presentation. So thank you.
Well, Scott, that was amazing. Thank you so much to our Senior Vice President of Government Relations. Now, he's going to be here on hand to answer questions. And now I would love to bring up Ambreen Tariq, Senior Program Director, Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, for her presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to test out this button, make sure we're working. Yes. Okay, so yes, hi, I'm Ambreen Tariq. I am from the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, and my presentation is going to focus on sort of zooming out a little bit on what Scott is talking about and really focus on collective action and what that means within the context of ORR. So, ORR is essentially, we are a coalition of the nation's outdoor recreation associations, founding members being MIC and National Marine Manufacturers and the RV Dealership Association. But our members, which is about 70 of them, represent 110,000 businesses across the country. And that's across every sector of outdoor recreation, right? So we're talking about from hunting to skiing, from scuba to sport shooting, from paddle sports to power sports. So we represent the whole of outdoor recreation, and we work on things that all of these businesses are interested in, which is growing the outdoor recreation economy sustainably and with accessibility at the central focus of increasing participation. So why do we do this? Before the how is, the wisdom in DC really is, if you are not at the table, you are on the menu, right? So the way we do this is we focus on convening, bringing our members together and really focusing on collective action. So bringing industry and government and other stakeholders together, educating, sharing information with our stakeholders, elected officials, really curating a lot of gatherings and the best data and information resources. And last but definitely not the least is advocacy. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. But the structure of our organization, it emphasizes the footprint that we need to make within DC to make change throughout every corner of this country. So one major core responsibility that ORR focuses on is data, right? We're going to get a little wonky, but I promise this is interesting. So ORR ensures that we receive national and state economic data from the Department of Commerce every year. This is what we refer to as BEA data. This is a profound development because it means we are counted as a unique and formidable sector in the US economy. And it's important that we show up that way with that strength and information. So the most recent data shows us that the outdoor recreation economy generated $1.2 trillion and 5 million American jobs in 2023. That comprises 2.3% of the nation's economy and 3.1% of all employees in this country. That's a pretty big number. So what does that mean for powersports, right? When we zoom in, and I know Scott was talking about these numbers, and his numbers really focus internationally, but our numbers that come from BEA are focused on domestic, right? So the aggregate transactions of all domestic transactions. So what this should show you is we have consistent growth over the last 12 years in this industry, and you can see even we can break it out by the states who are leading in these efforts, and this data should be able to inform those efforts. Where do we need to grow? And what's really interesting is the numbers from last year at a level that we have never reached before. So when we look at our programming, our priorities, our investments for the coming year, we have to think about what do we do to exceed this? What do we do to build those priorities out to keep growing as an industry? And we're going to be trying to answer some of those questions together. But what I also want to point out to you is it's great to talk about these numbers, about what our industry represents, but I want you all to walk away from here knowing that, you know, we hear a lot about oil and gas, we hear a lot about agriculture. These industries have their own legislative packages even in Congress. But we actually exceed all of them, right? So we actually are a very formidable industry in this country, and that is the role with which ORR steps forward in our advocacy and our efforts. So beyond the numbers, what we focus on is a lot of effort is put into our federal and state efforts, right? And Scott was talking about tracking a lot of those efforts, and I'm going to show you some other side of that work. So one of our core programs is that we work with state offices, but we also lead the charge in creating state offices of recreation. It's a fact that states that prioritize outdoor recreation create jobs, attract new businesses, build healthy communities, and connect residents to the outdoors. But to help bolster these efforts, ORR is committed to helping states create these offices of outdoor recreation and ensure existing offices succeed. So right now, we're at about 24, but we're right at the cusp of 25 offices. And what we do through those is a broad range of issues, including economic development, outreach and partnership, conservation, engagement, and so much more. We also focus a lot of our work on rural development. So we know that rural towns and regions across the US have recognized that outdoor recreation is a catalyst for economic growth, but they don't always have the resources or the funding to do so. So a lot of our work also focuses on that, on developing resources for them, providing technical assistance, or providing that catalytic funding to get their plans off the ground. We also help rural communities build sustainable and thriving recreational economies, right? Through our Rural Economic Development Toolkit, our 21st century, sorry, I'm skipping ahead for you guys, but the Rural Economic Development Toolkit, our implementation grants, and our other partnership with rural practitioners around the country. Workforce is another major core program of ours. Through the resources of our workforce profiles and our 21st century outdoor workforce resources, we are advocating for growing technical skills within our industry. In so many of our sectors across this industry, we have a pretty big labor shortage, right? So how do we grow an industry without the workers who are actually producing those products? So a huge focus of ours is really bringing in bringing the awareness to that need and also connecting people to those technical skills within our members' associations, and also helping place younger people in those industry jobs, raising awareness that there are good jobs in this industry that exist, and connecting K through 12 programs or pipeline programs. And then lastly, we also have our program, Together Outdoors, which is working on projects to increase access and participation to outdoor recreation for underrepresented communities by helping empower businesses and industry stakeholders with tools and resources to lead the charge on this. One example is we provide micro grants to small rural organizations all across the country that are bringing their communities out. And a lot of these communities they exist in what we call the adventure gap, right? Like they have historic experiences with being either limited to or limited from getting outdoors. But to grow our industry, these are exactly the communities that we need to get outside and enjoy the outdoors so that we can grow a thriving economy. So these microgrants really help focus on empowering those organizations. Okay, so then at the federal level, we have some wonky stuff here, and I really want you guys to stay patient with me. But it's important because it shows you the landscape at which ORR is working, right? We are the representative of this industry in DC, and so we are in the halls of Congress. We are meeting with policymakers and decision makers. And so these are some important examples that I want to show that impact not just power sports, but every sector in outdoor recreation. So one example is GAOA. So in 2020, the historic Great American Outdoors Act authorized full and permanent funding to address deferred maintenance on public lands and waters. ORR works with federal agencies and conservation and recreation partners to help direct those dollars towards projects that guarantee recreational access for diverse groups and, like I was mentioning before, historically underrepresented communities. Another really major law that ORR led on was the EDA, which is in 2021, we created the Economic Development Administration, and Congress created it. I didn't mean we as in ORR. And through the EDA, they announced $750 million in funding to travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation projects as part of the American Rescue Plan funding. ORR led the charge on getting first ever rural development language in the EDA to help create new authorities to fund infrastructure for recreation, like trails and other recreation opportunities in communities across the country. We also, like I was mentioning, the state offices, they're important for building allyship among governors and other leaders so that, again, we're contributing to this concept of collective action, bipartisan action that ORR leads on. One example, as we were talking about, our new friend, former Governor Jeff Burgum. So he attended our first ever bipartisan national convening in DC last year, which was for CEOs and governors and other leaders. And he spoke on a panel with other governors about the importance of outdoor recreation for their economies. 2 days after that panel, he announced the opening of North Dakota's outdoor recreation office, right? And just a couple weeks ago, he was in Congress at his confirmation hearing where he shared and very proudly announced our endorsement of his nomination and made it very clear through his testimony how important outdoor recreation is as a priority of his work, and it will continue to be. Along with that, he also discussed the importance of working with tribal communities and tribal consultations. So Scott had mentioned this law called Explore. So this is sort of a big deal, and I want to give you a little bit of context on why. So Explore is the first of its kind legislation that it's a bipartisan collection of bills. So I'm going to be referring to provisions throughout this presentation, and they are within Explore as a whole package. And it's the first of its kind. The level of importance of Explore can be described at the fact that when it passed the House and the Senate, it was completely uncontested. And that is not heard of in Congress these days, not only was it bipartisan, it had zero protest against it, right? So this is extremely important for our industry. It brings together the shared interests of the whole of our industry. And people spent decades working on this package. ORR led this effort with its members like MIC and many more. And actually today is the celebration for its passage in DC, but I'm gladly here and not there. I even testified for it in Congress. I was terrified, but it's taken a lot of people and a lot of coalitions to get us past the finish line, and it's a pretty big deal. But why? Because of the provisions in here, they really focus on modernizing federal systems, streamlining processes like permitting, and eliminating barriers and creating data-driven management strategies. And all of this at no cost to taxpayers, and all of this so that recreationists can actually plan and depend on their plans when they get there. And outfitters can also make business plans relying on data-driven information. Permitting processes are more transparent. It's not a word of mouth anymore. So there are tremendous benefits from this, and I can't even remember the number of bills in there. So the overview that I've shared with you obviously affects powersports, but there are some important provisions in this that are very specifically and uniquely important for powersports. So one of them is this provision on motorized and non-motorized access, right? And in that provision, they specifically call out the importance of BLM and other federal agencies to identify new opportunities for motorized recreation, new and updated maps for motor vehicles by the Forest Service and BLM. And then some of these other provisions I'm going to point out, which is supporting rural communities and addressing overcrowding, rather than hearing arguments about overuse and overcrowding and limiting participation. Now we're going to use geospatial mapping and actual data to help park management direct people to places that are lesser used, and really looking at stewardship responsibly rather than limiting participation in that way. And so they're providing these resources and directives to land management agencies to do so. And then also there's modernizing recreation management, which is prioritizing recreation and coming up with policies that are geared towards that. Permit streamlining, like I was mentioning, and transparency for guided trips. I have a friend in New Jersey who is an outfitter for fly fishing. And when Explore passed, he sent me this email saying how important this is for him and his family, because now he can actually create plans for his business that he can rely on, because it's, again, it's transparent and he can depend on getting that permit when he's applying for it. And then there are three very important bills that became provisions in here. So one of them is about people with disabilities. So there is a bill in here that talks specifically about giving agencies the directive to explore opportunities and pathways to create accessible opportunities, whether that's trails or assistive technology, and educating their staff and park members on these opportunities. And then there's another very important bill in there for military and veterans, focusing on therapeutic benefits of outdoor recreation for these communities, as well as providing park passes for veterans, and a very important workforce pilot program that's going to take place between DOI to start creating those workforce pathways for veterans, which is an incredible and untapped source in our whole industry. And then the last one is also youth access. So this has codified every kid in a park, providing fifth graders with park passes. There's a statistic that says that if a child does not have meaningful opportunity to recreate by the fifth grade, it is very unlikely that they will do so as adults. So it's important that we actually focus laws and policies and making sure that kids from all across the country are getting those opportunities. So these are some of those major big picture provisions that we want to focus on, because ultimately for us, as a whole industry and even for powersports, it's about increasing access to participation, using data-driven strategies to do so, and being involved at our local levels as well as federal levels to have those conversations with policymakers and push information about the benefits of our industry, as well as not just the health and community, but the economic power that comes with outdoor recreation. That's it for now, and I think we will turn it over to questions. Thank you.
Ambreen, thank you so much. And Scott, thank you. I'm making my way up there to hang out and ask some questions. These are obviously incredibly important topics and issues that affect all of us. And Scott, I'd like to start with you, please. You, in your presentation, you had mentioned that there were more than 100,000 bills that were introduced to Congress. How does your team have time to review these?
Yeah, great question. So we have a system that we buy that actually tracks every single bill that's introduced, gives us keywords. This system costs probably more than any motorcycle that's out here on the floor individually. It's a super expensive system, but what that does is it gives us a first cut based on keywords. So it might be public lands, it might be protection, it might be emissions, it might be brakes, it might be noise levels, exhaust, that kind of stuff. So each of those keywords then will kick out to any one of the number of folks that you saw up on the screen, and then they go through them on a regular basis. So right now is our crazy season because Congress just came back in and they're all introducing bills. 48 of the 50 states came in and they're new legislatures and they're all introducing bills. So it's not unusual for staff to wake up in the morning, they've got 150 bills that they've got to go through, and then out of those 150 they've got to write letters to the elected officials that then get sent over to me to take a look at. We send them out and we weigh in with folks. So extremely tedious process, not something that anybody else would want to try to do, but it's one that we have a really good team that does a great job with it.
How many people on your team?
We've got 9 in total. Yeah.
Wow, it's a lot for 9 people to go through. Some of the proposed tariffs have also been delayed a month. So what would the impact to the power sports industry be if they actually implemented that 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, as well as the 10% on China?
Yeah, so if you think about it, if you've got a $20,000 vehicle that you're selling, whether that's a motorcycle, an ATV, a side-by-side, whatever it might be, if you think, raise your hand if you think right today you could sell that for $25,000 instead of selling it for $20,000. Right? I didn't think I see a hand that has gone up. That's what it might mean for our industry. So much of our industry over the last 5-6 years has been based off of the USMCA, they call it, the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which is a trade agreement between US, Mexico, and Canada that allows for back and forth trade of these products as they're being built, and then in the end you sell them off, and as long as they're a certain percentage of domestic content, there's limited or no tariffs on them. This 25% would apply every single time something goes back and forth across the border. So you might have an engine that starts out here, it goes over to Mexico, it gets some work done on it, it comes back here for some additional work, and then it goes back to Mexico, gets put into a finished product, or it's here and is put into a finished product. Each time it's coming back and forth across the border, that's a 25% addition on top of the expense. So no question in my mind it would be paralyzing to our power sports industry if he goes forward with the full 25% on all of that stuff. And you know, I mean, I get the idea of Mexico. We've got an immigration issue. We've got problems with fentanyl. There's no question about that, and then that needs to be addressed. Our friends up in Canada, Landon French, who's the head of Moto Canada, the equivalent of MIC up there, is here with us today. You know, I grew up in Michigan. There's not a really big border issue that's going on with the Canadian border. There's not a huge fentanyl issue. Any fentanyl coming in is bad, right? But it is nowhere near what we've got on the southern border. So really would be, I think, paralyzing both to our industry as well as significant inflationary aspect.
Well, speaking of the word paralyzing, COVID did exactly that a couple of years ago, and wasn't it MIC that got power sports manufacturers and dealerships designated as essential workers, essential services that allowed them to stay open?
Absolutely. So when you may recall when COVID hit, many of the states shut down, the federal government was shutting things down, and you had to go to CISA, the federal agency that governs what is considered an essential service, and kind of apply to be essential service from them. And it took me about 3.5 weeks of being on twice weekly calls with Chris Krebs, who was the head of CISA at the time, making our argument, using the fact that many of our motorcycles, our ATVs, and our side-by-sides are used by law enforcement, right? They're used by law enforcement on the streets, they're used by law enforcement in BLM property, Park Service property, Forest Service property, things like that, and just making the case on behalf of our industry. He agreed with that and allowed our manufacturing to stay open and allowed our dealerships to stay open. And it really saved us because it was a time when we didn't know whether the industry was going to be crushed or whether people were going to get outside and do more outdoor recreation. And thankfully, as they decided to go out and do more outdoor recreation and get onto our power sports, we were able to kind of keep up with that and sell the vehicles.
And speaking of getting out and maybe moving across to different places, the fly-in looks really cool, but maybe for those that aren't familiar with it or haven't been to DC, how would someone navigate going to the fly-in?
We make the fly-in super easy for you. So what it is you pay for your transportation to DC and your hotel room for 2 nights. We cover pretty much everything else. We cover most of the meals that are there. We will give you a list of all of the issues that we're advocating on behalf of, and you can pick and choose from those issues the ones that are important to you. And so you can read through summaries that we have of each of them. We also do videos online so that you can watch a video of us telling you about what those issues are, why they're important to the industry, what the impacts might be, and then you can also watch a video that is a mock interview or a mock meeting in a member's office so that it looks like you're meeting with a member of Congress or their staff and how that would go. You do not have to be an expert on the issues. You do not have to be a lobbyist. You do not have to be somebody who follows government relations issues on a regular basis. We make all of that for you, and then we set up all of the meetings for you so that when you come to DC, you get a list of the locations. We have a group of speakers. It's usually people from NHTSA. It may be people from various BLM or other public lands agencies or EPA or whatever agencies are the kind of the topics of the day. They come in and they give us, and you hear from legislators. So you may have recalled when I showed the House motorcycle caucus, all 3 of those guys were standing in front of our fly-in backdrop, right? Because they all come to our fly-in. They give us, they speak to us, talk about the issues. We have a chance to educate them on the issues. Super important thing. So do not fear coming there if you're not a DC insider. Please do come. And we actually have, I have up on the corner of the stage some of these brochures here about, kind of what the fly-in is about, how you can register for it, and how easy it is.
Okay. And finally, Scott, for you, how can our AIMExpo attendees help us help the industry?
Yeah, good question. I would say for anybody out there who wants to be involved, understanding kind of the impact the local impact that you have, knowing state legislators, knowing federal legislators, if you've got any kind of a relationship with them, let us know about it because we'd love to have you go in and set up meetings with them and have discussions with them. The other is just to let us know which issues are your priority issues. It may be, I heard a lot of dealers tell me a couple of years ago, I don't need to worry about PFAS. That's the manufacturers that have to worry about that. And I was saying, you need to worry about this because what's going to happen is they're going to ban these products and you're not going to have replacement parts. You're not going to be able to sell youth vehicles that have PFAS in gaskets that are inside the engines and aren't things that kids are sucking on and playing with or putting in their mouth, right? And so everybody is going to be impacted by this. But if there are other issues that I didn't touch on there, whether it's noise issues, emissions issues, small business issues, let us know about it, and we love to hear from our members, and we will make sure that we add any of those issues to the list that we're tracking.
Thank you very much. And Ambreen, I have a couple of questions for you, please. What does having this recreation economy data do, and why is it so important to show up as a unified voice?
Yeah, so the first part of the question, right, beyond the data being a quantifiable measure, one of the important elements of having it available is that it's an apples to apples comparison between industries. So when we're having these policy conversations, we can show up with that collective information. And it also gives us an opportunity of year after year having a measure to compare even within our industry. How are the sectors doing? Like the growth between our industries, there's always a competition between boating and RVs and motorcycles, and there may be variances every year. So for one, we need to keep that competition going, but also to be able to study it. And what's been really incredible to see is that like the BEA numbers have been now a commonplace occurrence in congressional hearings, in policy conversations. They are cited to in research papers and media coverage. This is how we show up, and our collective importance, our collective presence is represented through this data.
And what can the MIC community do to grow recreation?
Yeah, so I would say first, thinking about access, right? We have to think about access in terms of participation. How can we work individually and collectively to think about increasing participation, not just by the recreationists, but also by businesses, and thinking about those demographics as the future of our industry. Also, you know, Scott's been talking a lot about like fly-ins and participation, but also just the individual and local involvement and communication with your representatives, because the dealers and the manufacturers, you all live in these districts that are extremely important, and your voice as a constituent is sometimes even more important than an organization that shows up. So staying involved locally on a regular basis is extremely important for the future of our industry.
Right. Now, before I ask my last question of Ambreen, does anyone have a question for Scott or for Ambreen? Okay. Ambreen, how can we ensure future success for the power sport industry?
So there are a few examples here. One of them I would say is really thinking about partnerships. Being connected to other sectors within this industry is extremely important. And I say that not just because it's a nice thing to do, but it's actually necessary, because as we look at consumer data, we see that more and more participation is multimodal. So someone who's going out, renting an RV, is also going to have a kayak or rent a bike, or they're going to go camping, or they are cross-cutting multiple sectors. So for us to stay involved only within our sector is not a strategic way to move into the future. So building those relationships, building those partnerships within our industry is extremely important, but also with state offices. They have a lot of resources, and building those relationships will help direct people to your businesses, or as simple as welcoming people into this. Like yesterday, I tried for the first time side by side. Thank you to Las Vegas Off-Road Adventures. It's really intimidating being an adult and trying something for the first time, right? Like, it makes you feel silly. But something as simple as having your frontline workers be welcoming and be trained in that type of culture to help dismantle some of that intimidation, or what it means to understand equipment, and a lot of times these skills are culturally passed down. So sometimes people just don't have that. So building those relationships, having those outreach events, and also focusing on workforce. Whether it's public school districts have excellent K-12 programs that are connected to career information. So many of our youth aren't aware that the outdoor recreation industry represents outdoor recreation careers, whether that's STEM jobs or manufacturing. These are good jobs. These are good family supporting jobs that we need to be able to promote. So I would say thinking about it holistically in that way is extremely important.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your insight. Really appreciate it. Will you be over here on the side of the stage if anyone does decide that they have any questions and just didn't want to ask it out loud? No problem. Ambreen, Scott, thank you so much again. Our next presentation is coming up on the stage at 4:15, so thank you so much for joining us.